Hey, welcome once again to Lehto's Law. And the reason I'm pausing there is that I think that I pressed the wrong button for a second. I did that, by the way, I did that last week also. I pressed the wrong button and everything went away. And so I apologize, but hey, here we are. Volume on the Nessie Blue a tiny little bit. So I think this should be perfect. But I'm jinxing myself by saying that. So there you go. Butcher Boy. Hi, Steve from California. Hey, thanks for checking in. Thanks for getting up early. And Alaska here, state with three time zones in Alaska, but aren't most of you over on the far left or no? Friend in Alaska, so I've always enjoyed people in Alaska. Tigerman 99515, which I'm guessing is a zip code. The Seattle Cyclist, hi from Seattle. And by the way, guys, it was, I can't remember now. I'm gonna shut my phone up, by the way, just in case. I had a mention in a recent video about how I was looking for transmitter tubes. And I know that last week, I think I showed you this transmitter tube that somebody sent me. And I really, really like the radio stuff. But another gentleman, not to be outdone, sent me a transmitter tube. Now, you call that one a tube? No, this is a tube. So thank you very much. I have a couple others headed my way, apparently. But, you know, this one comes with its own stand because it has to. So gotta love the old radio stuff from back in the day, as we like to say. Checking in from Grand Prairie, Wisconsin. Oh, Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. You got a lot of sun there right now? I suspect not. We've had a cold snap here in Michigan that's been outrageous. It's been cold. By the way, we're 1 minute and 49 seconds in, and we've already got 100 people. And this, by the way, is somehow my way of saying 100 people. 100 people in the room. My goal, and I've told you this, my goal is to get 500 people here. So we're not there yet. Try Fingers from the Texas Panhandle checking in. There you go. Hey, Paul Bednall from Nottingham, I suspect, in England. Is it any place near from where Robin Hood hailed back in the day? I believe he hung out in a place called Nottingham Forest, if I could be correct. 60 degrees in Denver? Wow. I mean, I know you guys are higher than us, but I didn't know you'd be warmer than us at this time of the year. So there you go. Just north of you in Davison, Zagnuts rule. Hey, we'll have to agree to disagree on that because, I mean, do they even make Zagnuts anymore? Davison's a little town not far from the post office I get my mail at. Making coleslaw live. By the way, and I don't want to turn this into a contest or anything, but if anybody has any tips for coleslaw, one that I could personalize and actually call it Lehto's Slaw. I might one of these days do a video where I make slaw, just because it's gotten to the point now where everybody asks me about that. And it's the obvious thing that happens when you read Lehto's Law and miss the apostrophe. Your microphone is obstructing my vision, but is it performing its job? That's the question. So there you go. And by the way, just so you know, there's always stuff happening off camera you can't see. This microphone is too short, so I have it propped up by a thick book. And by the way, the book is called A History of the Vikings, which apparently is thicker and thicker than you expect for a book about such an esoteric topic. Howdy from Texas, Spider Monkey. Hey, how you doing? What do you think the charges against Judge Shelley Joseph from Massachusetts? I am unaware of them. I apologize. I do try to follow legal stuff from other states. Let's see if it goes this way. There we go. But once in a while I miss stuff. And so if you ever see something that you think I should comment on, please email to me, steve@lehtoslaw.com, and I'll get it. And I try to respond to or look at all things. Once in a while, everybody jumps on and says, hey, here's the story you need to be covering. And I'll get so many of them, it becomes painfully obvious, and I'll do it. And once in a while, somebody go, I'm sure you've seen this, and they send me something I haven't seen yet. So never assume I've seen it all. I do. There's a variety of news sources I check every morning, and some of them are very, very comprehensive, and some are not. So occasionally I miss stuff. 73 degrees F in Phoenix. Dave Bailey, thanks for checking in. And people are suggesting you put coleslaw on hamburgers and hot dogs. I've never thought of that. I will admit it. What do you think about Frank Zappa and his awesome guitaring? Allocated Brain. You know, I admired Frank Zappa. He was a creative thinker. I've cracked a few jokes about dental floss and becoming a dental floss tycoon, which is a reference to a Frank Zappa song. But I know that he passed away a while back. But I enjoy any musicians who are creative and different. And I know that he's considered very, very influential because he's such a creative guy, very intelligent guy too. I remember seeing him on talk shows, and he's one of those guys where you're like, wow, this guy's smart. And you can never tell with musicians. Once in a while, you hear an interview with a musician, and you're like, wow, that guy's an idiot, but he's got good music. But no, Frank Zappa was a very, very smart guy. Johnny Nimble, Lehto, Slaw, there you go. Sherwood Forest was where Robin Hood hung out as a sheriff. It was a sheriff of Nottingham who was his nemesis. But I always assumed that Sherwood Forest was near Nottingham. It had to be, right? Or I could be completely wrong. I don't know. I remember a couple of years ago, the Tour de France started and did one leg in England, at least one leg in England. And they ran through, I believe it was Sherwood Forest. But again, I don't know. My memory is a lot like Ronald Reagan telling anecdotes at times where you're like, what, wait, really? And they would ask his press people, like, where did he get that from? And they go, oh, he remembered it. What are you going to do? How often do you forget to place the $100 bill? I never forget to place it. I just forget to move it. It's always back there. This $100 bill is dedicated to this set the same way the cars are and the mics are. This $100 bill has not left the room in several months. And you might remember that a while back, a guy mailed me another 100 to replace the one I had. And I actually signed the old $100 bill and mailed it to him. And then he sent me this one. And I said, really? I mean, but like, are you going to hang on to that? I mean, it's a lot of money to hang on to because it's got a scribbled signature that no one can read. And he said, no, it means that much to me. So I said, okay. So this $100 bill, it's not like I take it out of my wallet every day and put it back up here. It's just here. I trust the bill. It's not like I take it out of my wallet every day and put it back up here. It's just here. I trust the people who have access to the room to not take it. Weird Al, Punky Meowster says Zappa is cool, but Weird Al is better. You can't really say musicians are better than one another. I mean, artists are artists. Weird Al has some extremely hilarious stuff, but he's doing pure comedy. Frank Zappa's stuff may have had a sense of humor to it, but I don't think he would consider himself a musician, comedian. And so, like I said, the Weird Al lives on his own planet. And I don't think he'd even mind saying that. So Zappa had some funny stuff. Absolutely did. Have you seen the movie The Current War about AC and DC? Not the band, but Tesla and Edison. I have not seen it. I'd like to see it. I'm fascinated by that. I've seen other things about Tesla and Edison and that. I will tell you, I went and saw Ford versus Ferrari yesterday, and it came out Friday. And I was thinking about doing a movie review video. And then I realized that, I don't know if anybody wants to hear me do that. But I will review the audience I sat with, because behind me was a row of people who'd come together. It was a couple adults and a bunch of kids. And the kids were completely behaved. And the adults talked as if they didn't realize other people were sitting around them, just talking at, full volume, as if they're in their living rooms at home. And when tickets are $39 a piece or whatever they cost, I would expect a slightly better experience than that. And I was a little disappointed, but I won't go there. The movie was really good. If you're a car guy or a car gal, or you like automobiles, I think you'll enjoy the movie. Matt Damon, of course, is great. Christian Bale's pretty good too. But Matt's the star. He plays Carroll Shelby, and it's all about Carroll Shelby and Ford Motor Company launching a war, trying to win the Le Mans race, 24 Hours of Le Mans, and how they eventually did that. In fact, the year they did it, that was so big, they were 1, 2, 3. So it was a pretty cool movie. So I'd highly recommend it for the people who are in my audience. Sphinx Rising, Steve, you're awesome. Thank you. I assume you're talking to me, and I appreciate that. Allocated Brain said, I saw Ministry last year. I assume you mean the band Ministry? I like Ministry also. I like some of the darker wave stuff from England, and they actually are one of my favorite bands from that era. The Rolling Stones, greatest of all time, Seattle Cyclists. You know what? I was just actually talking to somebody the other day about the Rolling Stones, and as an old disc jockey, I've got to talk about music. You know, I love music. And what people often miss about the Rolling Stones is you can go back and listen to their earliest stuff, Under My Thumb, Satisfaction, As Tears Go By, the early stuff. And it's extremely good. And you understand how young these guys were when they made that music. And you go, this stuff is great. Paint It Black. I mean, to write a song that good sounding and that intelligent for someone that age is to me, it's astounding. I mean, I can't write music, I can't play music, so I have a deeper awe of musicians. And then you watch the stuff they've done over their entire careers, and you see some of the later stuff they've done. And I'm not talking about the most recent stuff, I'm not as up on that, but I'm talking about like 10 or 15 years after they started, and the stuff like Memory Motel and Wild Horses and things like that, where they went through different styles and so on, but even so, it was such good music. And you got to respect the fact at how old these guys are. They still tour and can still stand upright. I mean, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards might have somehow solved like the problem of death, apparently. So I have the most immense amount of respect for the Rolling Stones. Tommy, Wolverine or Spartans? You know something? Yesterday I was rooting for the Wolverines. And I've always been a fan of the Michigan football team. And obviously they've had some issues lately. They can't beat Ohio State, apparently. If they win this year, that'd make my season. But they beat the Spartans pretty soundly yesterday in Ann Arbor on a very, very cold day. So I was watching that, and I was quite happy about it. And so, by the way, we've broken the 200-person mark at the 11-minute mark. I appreciate that. Like I said, my goal one day to hit 500. A man can dream, can't he? Due to they stopped touring, they would die. The Rolling Stones gathering, no moss and all. You are probably correct, Johnny Nimble. And, you know, if you think about it, it's actually true. Them going is the fact that they don't stop. And so, you know, does Mick Jagger get exercise? Just watch him on stage, okay? So I suspect you're right. If they decided to retire and go sit someplace on rocking chairs and spend their money, they'd probably die just, you know, very, very quickly. So, hello from Cypress, Texas, 66F. David Wiseman says Nirvana and Creedence Clearwater Revival were the best bands. CCR was pretty good. John Fogerty, of course, did some solo stuff later. Nirvana was good. And, of course, Nirvana is credited for bringing in a whole new sound of music. So, anytime you've got somebody who's on the leading edge of a whole new movement music, you got to respect that. I will admit I was not the biggest Nirvana fan at the time, but you know what can I tell you? If you could live in a movie or TV show, what would it be? Green Acres. And I I don't want to be Oliver. I want to be somebody in his orbit just to watch him and what he goes through. I don't know. That's a very, very tough question. I'll have to think about that for a little bit. So Minnesota News Now says, hello, Steve. I sent you an email. Okay. I'll check it when I check it. Bakersfield, California. You know, I spent time in California, but I never made it, I don't think, out to Bakersfield. Probably drove through it once or twice or past it. So Lawrence Taylor. I live in North Dakota, but am in Terrell, Texas at the moment. Okay. John Fogerty was sued for plagiarizing himself. Beelzebub points, and I'm going to clean these for a second, but that is a fascinating story, a legal one and a musical one. And I keep thinking about doing a story, a video about it. And I might one of these days, but one of the cool things about John Fogerty is he's a man of principle, and he wrote much of the music for Creedence Clearwater Revival. Have you ever seen The Rain? Who Will Stop the Rain? Looking Out My Back Door, so on and so forth. And then that was all with one record label. John Fogerty went solo, and he thought the record label that had the catalog of CCR music wasn't treating him properly, and they got involved in a dispute over royalties. And John Fogerty then released some solo music. And somewhere in all of this, the people who owned the catalog at the old record company decided to sue John Fogerty for plagiarizing music in their catalog that he had written, which meant that, yes, he's being sued for plagiarizing himself. And the funny thing about American copyright law is if you're suing somebody for copyright and you win, they have to pay your attorney fees. But the way the law is written, if you lose, then you got to pay the other side's attorney fees, regardless of who started the litigation. So when the record company sued John Fogerty for plagiarizing himself, he went to court and they won. That is, John Fogerty won. So at the end of the trial, he then said, I want them to pay my attorney fees. And the record company goes, no, that's not how it works. And it went, I believe, to the U.S. Supreme Court. But I know it went up on appeal and it got upheld that John Fogerty not only was exonerated in the lawsuit, but the other side had to pay his attorney fees. So it was a great case, very, very fascinating, very, very strange. So pretty cool. Darth Nader says Metallica is the greatest. I respect Metallica a lot also. I know that they're a bunch of cool guys. I know that a lot of their music is pretty interesting. And I also really respect the fact, I believe they're one of the bands that doesn't care if you quote unquote, bootleg their stuff. It's kind of like, once we're done with it, you can have it. So I'm talking about, recording live shows. So Lawrence Taylor's, I'm a truck driver. So I assume that means that's why you travel around the nation. Pretty cool there. I respect what you guys do behind the wheel of the big rigs. So the Rolling Stones originally started out as a country themed band. I hadn't heard that before. I know a lot of bands started out differently than what they wound up doing. And the interesting thing about the Rolling Stones is I think they evolved their own sound. So it doesn't really matter how they started, We hear about bands that started out like, Christian rap groups and they wind up being something else. So you never know. There are only two genders. What was your first car? I've talked about this before. It was a 69 Dodge Charger, much like that model right there, but a little bit brighter yellow. And it's what inspired me to do the book about the winged cars, the Dodge Daytona and the Plymouth Superbird. So I really like those cars. Do you plan on keeping the new intro? I'm now getting used to the new voice who's not a robot. Tim Apple. Thank you for that. And here's the thing. I added an intro and an outro, or they might call it an extra, but I added these things to the videos. And before, there was just dead air under the intro and dead air under the outro. So I thought, well, I'm just going to stick these voices in there, intros in there. And the reason that this came about is I met somebody through my channel who was a disc jockey and said, hey, I'm fascinated because you're always talking about being a disc jockey and music and the microphones, and corresponded a little bit. And I said, next time you're in a studio, could you do me a favor and just cut me a little 3-second intro and a little 3-second outro? And she did that and sent them to me. I stuck them in the videos and almost immediately started getting people complaining about her or saying they liked her or saying they're surprised by her. But a disproportionate number of people said, oh, and she's obviously a robot, which came as news to me and to her because she's a real person. But this is the internet and people can be skeptical of everything. There are probably people out there who think I'm an animatronic device also. So that's fine. So I asked her if she'd record me a second outro so that I'm not a robot, which we've been running also. And so I asked her if somewhere down the road, as something I think to enlighten this entire topic, if she'd be willing to come on and do an interview with me over the internet, because she's actually a couple thousand miles away. And if she would come on the internet to disprove her robotic existence. And she said that she'd be willing to do that. So right now we're working on the logistics and the technical aspects of that. I did an interview with Sam Crack, the guy with the pizza car. And we did that, but it was extremely complicated with cameras at both ends, recordings at both ends. And I had to Dropbox a ton of stuff to him and he had to stitch it together. And it took like 2 weeks to make. I haven't got that kind of time or that kind of energy. So I'm hoping just to do like a high quality Skype interview and ask her some questions that a robot couldn't answer. So I won't necessarily keep the intro exactly as it is. I might get a couple different ones. They just don't all sound alike, but you know how it goes. So Robert Neal, Lehto, Slaw, great title. Thanks. I'm running out of good title ideas. So there you go. Steve, have you always had the gift of gab? JC. It's interesting. People who knew me as a child just wished I would shut up. So it depends on the context as to what you call it. But I worked in radio for a long time, and radio people have to speak, and disc jockeys speak for very short periods of time. And I did top 40 where you'd speak for 10, 15 seconds at the most. But I did actually for a while host talk shows. And I'm going to tell you right now, ain't nothing worse than hosting a talk show at 3 o'clock in the morning in Detroit on a Sunday morning because no one's calling in. You're talking to yourself. You're trying to get the phones to ring, and it ain't happening. And I remember I had a producer at one point in time who would walk in and go, Steve, no matter what you do, you can't beat this dead horse and get it to wake up. And I'd be over on the other side of the glass trying to get people to call, and he'd be on the other side making motions like he's beating a dead horse. But as far as the gift of gab goes, yeah, something. The most I ever talk in my videos is 15, 20 minutes. So that's not that hard to do when you know the topic well. But, some of them are shorter, 8 or 9 minutes. Now, the live video feeds, ironically, are the longest things I do because we often go for an hour and a half. So there you go. Sam Crack needs intros in and outro. There you go, Mike. Obviously, he'd be stepping up his game. See, I thought that the intro would make the show sound a little more professional. And I've had people say, but Steve, you're not professional. Are you trying to sound professional? And I go, granted, I've always said I wanted to sound like a good amateur as opposed to a bad professional. So, oh, hey, Dino Rat. Sorry you're late. Mark from Washington. Yeah. Well, we've only been here for 21 minutes or so. So there we go. Talking about the artificial intelligence, very sophisticated with the IBM Watson. For those of you who are interested in chess, I'm sure you know this, but they've now got a computerized artificial intelligence program that's played chess, and it plays chess at such a high level. Layla, I'm remember the exact name, but it has Google created this thing, and it plays chess so well that it actually is freaking out everybody, including chess experts. And if you study the games that they've released of the chess program, playing against other chess programs, it's shocking when it is analyzed by somebody who says, look what it's doing, and explains it. There's a guy on YouTube called Agadmator, Agadmator. He's Croatian. Brilliant guy. Very, very nice guy. Love watching his videos explaining chess. And it is so, so cool to watch him analyze games played by that artificial intelligence learning program, because it's scary, and you realize that yes, one day robots will rule us all. Not necessarily Canadian robots, but robots. So there you go. My friend is really good at golf. I once asked her why she didn't go pro, and she said she'd rather win amateur tournaments than lose professional ones. Yeah, there you go. It's the whole a big fish in a little pond thing. The chess computer that IBM built is Deep Blue. Yeah. David Watt, by gad, sir, I'm determined to get a mention. And there you go, sir. You got a mention. David Watt. There you go. Ralph Amatic, joining to be one of the few, one of the 500. Well, you're one of 249 right now. So there you go. Darth Nader, love your show. I listen every day. Steve, do you still practice law? I only ask because you seem like spend a lot of time on YouTube. Here's the thing, and I'm going to tell you guys, my 249 closest friends, and the thousands who watch the videos later, a little secret. Okay, I still practice law, but I shoot the videos and they're recorded. So if you watch a 12-minute video of mine, it means I sat down in front of a camera for 13 minutes. Okay, so I cut the beginning and the end off. And I slap the intros on and the titles on, and I upload it to YouTube. I shoot 2 a day. So to shoot 2 12-minute videos isn't that complicated, especially since I'm not using a script, obviously. So I shoot 2 videos one day, and they go up the next day, okay? So I practice law, shoot 2 videos. Next day, the videos go up. I practice law, So it's not that hard to do. If you think too much about it, it sounds like a grind, but it's not. I actually have fun doing this. And so, for instance, video editing reminds me a lot of audio editing, except in the old days, when I worked at radio stations, you'd edit on tape. And there's going to be people in the audience who know this, but they'd have this actual real tape. And if you had a piece of tape that had something on it, you had to edit it. You'd actually put it in a block and cut it with a razor blade and slide the pieces together, and then use more adhesive tape to connect them together, and you'd actually do that where you're actually cutting tape. And now, of course, it's all digitized. It's all on the computer, and you can edit stuff so fast that it's shocking. The idea that I can actually shoot a video with a little camera that costs $75, like I'm doing right now, or I shot many videos with GoPro cameras, cost like $1.50. And so it's $150. It's not that hard or complicated these days to shoot videos and post them. To make them look good or sound good takes some practice, but I've done that. I've been practicing now for 800 videos. Several people have asked, including somebody else's, any book offers this week. Jeopardy 4100. Reading is fundamental. Yes, it is fundamental. I don't ever want to come on here and sound like I'm shilling, but I do still have books. So right now I've got 3 books that people seem to be interested in: American Murder Houses, Chrysler's Turbine Car, and Preston Tucker and his Battle to Build a Car of Tomorrow. So that's the Tucker guy right there with that book. The Turbine Car is one on the end here. And the American Murder Houses is about the houses around the country where people got killed and the house became a ghoulish spectacle. So if you're interested in any 3 of those, or any one of those 3 books, or all 3, I don't care, email me, steve@lehtoslaw.com. I'll put it in the description below. And as long as I've got supplies, right now I've got probably a dozen of each on hand. I'll sell them to you for less than Amazon. Plus, I'll sign it and I'll mail it to you. But you got to be in the U.S. Unfortunately, shipping to England, China, Canada, Australia is prohibitive. I actually had a guy who had me send him a copy book to China, and it cost like 3 times what the book was worth. He goes, "Yeah, but I want to do it." I said, "Okay, if you want to do it, that's great. But I, in good conscience, I can't advertise that. So we won't be doing that. But yeah." Any one of the 3 books, Turbine Car, Tucker, or American Murder Houses, shoot me an email. I'll invoice you via Square. You'll get a book in about a week. So there you go. So I'd like to have a copy of the Plymouth Superbird book. I've got copies of that also. That's a big coffee table book about the winged car, which I'm pointing to right there. Dodge Daytona Plymouth Superbird. I do have those in stock also. I believe they're $30. I'll have to double check that. It's normally a $45 book, so I'm selling it at a substantial discount, and I'm signing that as well. But I think I have a case of those. I think. I can always order more. Steve, I have to ask, will you ever go to the light side, i.e. iPhone? I'm not a big i guy. I don't do iPhones. I don't have an iMac or iPad or anything like that, iTunes. But I've always been using the PC stuff, and that's just it. And I also have an Android phone, which seems to treat me well. I suspect that the privacy violations are everywhere and are going to continue to get worse. And I don't know if switching over to Apple or Mac products will do any good on that, but you never know. So, Lawrence Taylor, American Murder Houses. I'm intrigued now. Here's the thing. A couple of years ago, my publisher called me and said, "Hey, Steve, I got an idea for a book." I said, "Really?" And she goes, "Yeah, American Murder Houses." And I immediately said, "No one's done that yet?" And anytime you can summarize a book into 3 words with no verbs, it's a good idea for a book. And she goes, "Yeah." She goes, "Write a chapter about each of the famous murder houses around the country. Lizzie Borden house, the Nicole Simpson condo, the John Benet Ramsey house, the Manson houses, whatever." And I'm like, that's a great idea. So I went out and did the research. I found 25 houses that are all still standing, and wrote a chapter about each one, about the murder, about the house, about the history of it, the context of it. Johnny Versace house is another one. The Villisca axe murder house is another one. The Hex house in Pennsylvania. And so all the houses that I wrote about are still standing. So there's 1 chapter per house at 25-26. And then I even did a chapter at the end about the real estate market for murder houses, because there's actually been research done on that. It's crazy. So American Murder Houses is one of the books that I've got available right now. So send me a note, steve@lehtoslaw.com, if you want one, and I'll hook you up via Square and all that. So where you can get a copy, you can get a copy from me, but you can also get all my books on Amazon. And also most of my books are carried in bookstores. The local Michigan ones might not be carried outside of Michigan, but if you go to a bookstore like a Barnes & Noble today, they'll have American Murder Houses in stock. They'll probably have the Preston Tucker book in stock, and they'll probably also have the Winged Car book in stock if they've got a decent book section on cars. So there you go. I think they knocked down Gacy's house. Yes, Gacy's house is one of the ones that got knocked down. There's a few other houses that got knocked down, and I did not focus on houses that have been knocked down for that reason. Because what good is it if I can tell you about it, but you can't go gawk at it? That's kind of the point of this. So I had a dilemma, I'll admit this, with the Manson houses. 3 murders, 3 different murder houses were involved with Charles Manson. And the one in the middle where Sharon Tate got murdered, that one has been knocked down. And so I wrote a chapter about those 3 and explain this. By the way, unfortunately, one of the 3 is gone now. But the first house and the third house are still there. So the La Bianca house and the Gary Hinman house. Wow. Once in I get a mental block, I'm like, should I start the sentence before okay, and I figured it out. So there you go. Did I read the letter that the notorious Michigan serial killer sent to the newspaper? Which serial killer are you talking about? Are you talking about the Oakland County child killer or the Ypsilanti guy? The Blue Gremlin and the Oakland County child killer. Yeah, there's been a series, a documentary series about the Oakland County child killer. For those of you who don't know, back in the late 70s, in Oakland County, there were 4 or 5 murders that they linked to one guy, one perpetrator who has never been arrested or convicted or anything like that. And it's unfortunate because these were children who got killed. And if you grew up in the Birmingham, Oak Park, Royal Oak area, there was a time when people were frightened, because of children being killed. And one of the kids who got killed was the little brother of a guy I played Little League baseball with. So it was a terrible, terrible thing. They've done some documentaries about it, and it appears that the police might know who did it, but the guy's no longer alive. So as a result of that, they're not publicizing what they know, and unfortunately, because they're not telling people what they know, it looks like they're covering something up. And there's some really, really strange twists and turns to the story, including the fact that one of the suspects might have been the child of an executive for a car company, and that guy may have had some pull. But as of right now, officially, it is an unsolved mystery. So there you go. Who was a Zodiac killer? I don't think they've solved that one yet. Another crazy serial killer. You must be an amazing video editor, as most experienced YouTubers say it takes about an hour of filming and editing per minute of whoever's saying it. Scott Winters. I've watched videos and read articles by people who say, if you're going to do YouTube videos, here's what you need to know. And I actually saw someone who goes, yeah, to shoot a video, it costs $5,000. Well, let me see here. I've got a camera, microphone, talent, a set, and I can press record, go edit. It doesn't cost me a penny. Now, the equipment costs me money, but spread that out over all my videos, and it's not that expensive. And I would say that for me to edit a 15-minute video, if I didn't watch it, like if I simply just put the titles on and hit, it would take like 5 minutes to edit. I watched them all once in real time just to make sure I didn't screw anything up. So a 15-minute video takes 20 minutes to edit, but even so, it's not a lot of time. So I don't think I'm a terribly good editor. I'm getting better at it. But for those of you who are curious, I use Adobe Premiere video editing software. It's kind of expensive, but as I'm learning to use it, it's got a lot more capability. I used to actually use, I'm not kidding you, Movie Maker, which is shareware that comes with Windows. So there you go. What are some of your favorite movies? Albert Buchheit. I could be mispronouncing it. I apologize if I am. My favorite movies. I'm glad you asked me that. I love The Prestige. Okay. That's a great movie. I also love Amadeus, the movie. And I know many people think that it's over the top with how they portrayed Amadeus, Mozart in the movie. won a stack of Academy Awards, but it is a fabulous movie, and some of the concepts in that movie are so brilliantly portrayed that it is amazing. And then another one I'll throw in there, just the fun of it, is I also love Shakespeare in Love. I know it's go on, attack me. It's a chick flick, but Shakespeare in Love is a wonderful movie. You can watch it over and over and over again, and you will see stuff you missed the first time, the second time, the third time. And it was so clever. And that's the kind of movie, when you hear the backstory and understand that that script was optioned by somebody, and they originally cast Julia Roberts and Kenneth Branagh to play the leads, which would have been horrible. And then it went into turnaround when those two decided not to do it. They couldn't get the movie made for years, and there were actually people in Hollywood going, it's an interesting movie, but interesting screenplay. And it wound up winning like 9 Academy Awards, and it's just a fabulous movie. The Prestige is an amazing movie. I read the book it was based on. They changed the movie a little bit to make it work as a movie. They had to change the story a tiny little bit, but it works both ways. And it's wonderful. I know that Robert Siskel hated it, or Robert Ebert hated it, because he considered himself a magician. He thought, this movie's wrong. But the movie is brilliant, and it operates on so many different levels that, it's just amazing. And Amadeus, again, a brilliant movie. I was never a big fan of classical music. And since then I've read, in fact, I've got it around here somewhere, not within arm's reach, of course, but I've got the book by Maynard Solomon, which is the biography of Mozart. And he had the most amazing life in real life versus the movie. The movie is obviously a fictionalized telling of the life story that's been, had some elements added to it for dramatic effect. But the movie to me is absolutely brilliant. So whether you like it or not, I don't, I can't guarantee you will, but I like those 3 movies a lot. So there you go. Ice Station Zebra is a great movie. James Bondero. It's been a while since I saw it, but I can tell you that if you like submarine movies, The Hunt for Red October is brilliant also. And I'm going to tell you right now, The Hunt for Red October is so well paced. You can watch that movie over and over again, and literally just watch how as soon as one scene starts to drag, boom, something else happens. And it's so clever and so well done. You don't need to understand submarine life to understand the movie. But it's a brilliant movie. It just happens to be partially set on board a submarine. So there you go. The Hunt for Red October. And by the way, I also read a lot. Cool Hand Luke's a good movie. But I read a lot of World War II books. And one of the best World War II books out there is a book written by Herbert Werner, who's a German U-boat commander who survived the war. And just mathematically, he beat the odds there because 90% of all the U-boat guys didn't make it back. But Herbert Werner wrote a book called Iron Coffins. So if you're into World War II at all, fascinating book to read about life on board a German U-boat and what it took to survive the war. John Little, Casablanca is my favorite movie. That's a wonderful movie. I agree with you on that. It's a classic for a reason. Did I like Perfect Storm? I saw Perfect Storm a couple of times a long time ago. And I recall liking it. And the only thing I regret about that movie is that the phrase perfect storm has become a cliche. Everything is a perfect storm. Oh my God, my video was a perfect storm, what happened yesterday at the intersection, there's a perfect storm. The reason it's a perfect storm is that it was so unusual. If it happened every day, it wouldn't be a perfect storm of anything. Looking forward to seeing the recent release of Midway, Steve Stalock. I'll be morbidly curious to see that, because I can tell you that if you go back and watch World War II films from the 1970s, they were almost universally horrible. I remember seeing Midway at the theater, and they bragged about the fact that it was being brought to you, it was Dolby sound. They're bragging about the sound and basically how loud it was when bombs went off. But most World War II movies back then were shot so poorly because, among other things, they didn't want to go the trouble of getting realistic looking, war things. So, like, for instance, Patton, okay? Now, don't get me wrong, George C. Scott did a bang-up job as Patton, but you're watching the Battle of El Alamein, and both sides have got like, Korean War era army tanks, and everything is wrong with everything in the scene, except that technically it looks kind of like it could be Africa, and there are army tanks out there. They're just off by about 30 years, So I've watched some of those movies more recently, and they're cringeworthy. I mean, they're bad. For those of you who are curious about war movies, obviously Saving Private Ryan is a wonderful movie, and the effort they put into making that movie realistic looking. Obviously, the story has some things in the plot that were added for dramatic effect. In real life, the one sniper wouldn't put the bullet through the other sniper's eyepiece. That's like an old urban legend. But for instance, the Tiger tanks looked and sounded real, and the machine guns looked and sounded real. And one of my favorite stories from that is when they approach that thing that looks like the movie screen outside, like an outdoor movie theater, but it's actually like a radar base supposedly. And as they're coming up and charging it, the guys behind the sandbags are shooting at them with what are called MG-42s, which is a German machine gun. And the MG-42 is a famous gun because of its high rate of fire, made it sound different. But its high rate of fire also meant that the barrels got so hot during firing that each gun had two guys assigned to it. One was a gunner, one was a loader. And the loader was not just connecting the ammo belts, but he actually had these things that were like oven mitts. And he'd hit the guy in the helmet to get him to stop shooting. And he'd reach over and very, very quickly grab a lever and pop the lever so he could remove the barrel while wearing the asbestos glove and put the hot barrel down and put the cold barrel in and clank it back and hit the guy and start shooting again. And the guns would actually have 3 barrels that they would rotate through to let them cool, because otherwise, if you kept firing, you'd eventually damage the barrel because it's so hot. So in the movie, they actually mention, we're going to make them shoot at us, and when they go to swap the barrels out, we'll advance, which means that these guys know what they're doing when it comes to writing the script. Secondly, though, when they finally get up there and they've got the guys and everyone stops shooting, as they walk by the guns, you can hear the barrels crackling in the soundtrack. They actually added the sound of the crackling barrels cooling off, which was something that was such a small little detail to put in there that I applaud the filmmakers. The opening scene on Omaha Beach is shocking and horrific, but that's actually what it probably looked like. So I thought they did a very good job of that. So minor problems with that movie technically, but otherwise I thought it was very, very well done. Somebody mentioned Stalingrad. I'm not sure if you're referring to a movie called Stalingrad or Enemy at the Gates. Enemy at the Gates, of course, is a movie that came out a couple years ago. Very, very good movie, I thought, but is based on a small anecdote in a larger book called Enemy at the Gates. And I remember reading the book when I was in high school, and then actually hearing movies coming out and going, I wonder which story they're going to tell. And it's actually, they're telling that particular story about the battle between the two snipers in Stalingrad, which is an amazing drama. And to put that together, somebody mentioned in the comments, and I apologize, Kelly's Heroes. David Watt. Now, here's the thing. I know people out there who love Kelly's Heroes as a movie. Okay. It's a typical movie for that era. It's kind of goofy. It's this ensemble plot where like Telly Savalas and Clint Eastwood and it's like 5 episodes of Love Boat set in World War II. Okay, just all these people who are in this movie. Okay, but for some inexplicable reason, Donald Sutherland plays a hippie. Donald Sutherland is actually groovy, baby, and I mean, who was saying that in 1944 or 45? I mean, it's just insanity. And some of the things they say in the movie are just so stupid, it's mind-blowing. But it wasn't intended as a World War II documentary. It was more of a romp set in World War II. Okay, so imagine if you took a movie with the sensibility of, like, say, the Dukes of Hazzard, okay, and set it in World War II. That's what Kelly's Heroes is. But what a lot of people miss is that in Kelly's Heroes is the theme song Burning Bridges, and it was done by the Mike Curb Congregation. Mike Curb later had a record company called Mike Curb Records, And the song Burning Bridges, go look it up right now. It's a great song. It got very little airplay. It should have been a hit. It was the theme song to Kelly's Heroes. And at one point in the movie, one of the guys walks across camera whistling it. So it's got a little bit of an internal joke there. But Burning Bridges by the Mike Curb Congregation, brought to you by Kelly's Heroes. So that's the high point of the movie for me. So Jeff Gilroy was here. There you go. Or is that Jeff? Gilroy is here. Marshall Smith, A Bridge Too Far. Another one where A Bridge Too Far is a great story. It tells a story about Operation Market Garden, where the Allies tried to drop a bunch of troops behind enemy lines and then launched an offensive in an attempt to hook them all up. And what they were trying to do, in essence, was capture a series of bridges through the Low Countries. And they wound up dropping some guys so far behind the lines they couldn't get to them. And then they also underestimated how long it would take them to get there. And so what wound up happening was that the offense at one end got stalled and the guys dropped behind enemy lines were just, out of luck. And it turned out to be very, very ugly for the Americans. But again, the movie was an ensemble cast. Sean Connery is in it, a bunch of other people. And again, they couldn't actually scrape up army tanks from the proper era. So they just used whatever surplus they had laying around. So there you go. When are you going to film your autobiography? It's called Lehto Ma Ego. Hey, The Bridge in the River Kwai is a good movie too. Again, it's one of those stories that they've overly dramatized, but it's a very, very good story, and they did a very good job, I think, of putting that one together. Thomas Case asks about Darkman. There you go, my friends. Darkman is a great movie. Darkman's a movie that very, very low budget. It came out, I'm guessing, late 80s, early 90s. I think early 90s. And it was like a cartoon comic book, live action, but a comic book sensibility of a not a superhero, because the guy has a dark side to him, but it's got the science fiction angle. This guy gets mangled and he comes up with this way that he can look normal for a little while. I'm not going to ruin it for you. You should watch it. It's a wonderful, wonderful movie. Liam Neeson, one of his very first starring roles. It may have been his first starring role. And Sam Raimi in his first larger budget movie. It wasn't his first movie. It was one of his first larger budget movies. And Darkman is absolutely wonderful. Sadly, Darkman didn't get as much attention as it should have, and it was underrated. I would highly recommend you check out Darkman if you get an opportunity there. David Beck, hi, Steve from Lansing. How you doing, my friend? I love Lansing. Drove by it last week. I went to Grand Rapids on business on Wednesday. John Little, Charlie Don't Surf. Apocalypse Now is a great movie. And it's, people call it a Vietnam movie. It's set in Vietnam, but of course it's the story, the Joseph Conrad story, Heart of Darkness, set in Vietnam. It's very, very surreal. I actually watched the director's cut last week, and Charlie Don't Surf, of course, is a famous quote from the movie. And the other one, of course, is I love the smell of napalm in the morning. It smells like victory. And people, of course, misquote that all the time because in reality, he says a couple sentences in between, but everyone remembers, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. It smells like victory. It's kind of like Gordon Gekko in Wall Street saying, greed is good. He actually says greed, for the lack of a better word, is good. But that's too long. So there you go. Bridge of Spies. Yeah, I watched that not too long ago. Tom Hanks. And it's a pretty cool movie about us in the Cold War exchanging spies with the East Germans and the Russians, the communists, and trying to get them to trade back and forth and how that worked. Sam I Am, hi, from Ludington, Michigan. That's over here, for those of you who don't know. Beautiful side of the state along Lake Michigan. Who is your favorite actor from Michigan? I like Jeff Daniels. Jeff Daniels is from Michigan. He's also got a place called the Purple Rose Theater. And he has that specifically in Chelsea, Michigan. He has that specifically because he was in Purple Rose of Cairo, which is a good movie, a Woody Allen film from a while back. Very, very funny movie if you haven't seen it. Purple Rose of Cairo. And he's in that. He also, I suspect, made more money in Dumb and Dumber. but I like him in Purple Rose. Dan B points out there's a Darkman 2, and I was going to mention that. The follow-ups weren't as good. It's kind of like RoboCop. The first one was good. I mean, it had some gory stuff, but it was a good movie. But the problem with RoboCop is I think they did a RoboCop 2 and RoboCop 3 maybe. And the follow-ups don't do them justice. Have you missed the film The Longest Day? It's been a while since I've seen it. So it's been so long I can't really comment on it. The Palette Wizard, do you like bowling? I'm going to be honest with you. In my entire life, I've bowled twice. Twice. That's it. It was not something my family ever did. I remember in high school, I went to visit a friend of mine, and he goes, "Hey, let's go bowling." I go, "I've never bowled." And he goes, "Oh, I'll teach you." So we walked over to a bowling alley. We bowled for a little while, and that's okay, and just never did it again. And then a decade or two later, was with some other people who were bored, and they said, "Hey, let's go bowling." And I'm like, "Okay." So yeah, those are the 2 times I've gone bowling. So unfortunately, no, just never got into it. Sorry. Run silent, run deep. Yeah, that's a good submarine film. And also, so is The Enemy Below, another submarine film about World War II. Run Silent, Run Deep reminds me, though, of Married with Children, when Al Bundy is talking to a man, I believe a young man who's about to get married, and he advises him, he goes, "Run, just run. Run silent, run deep." Not sure why it's funny, but it is. Has your martial arts training ever come into use to defend yourself or someone else? Donald asks. And I mentioned in an episode not too long ago that I took Taekwondo for many years. At one point in time, I have a 2nd degree black belt, and never actually used it in self-defense in that sense. But I can tell you that I'm convinced that the training gave me better balance and better coordination, which has come in handy. I can't point to specific examples, but I know situations I've been in where having good balance helped me. So it's a weird way of looking at it. I've had people say to me, "Why would you study a martial art if you're never planning on getting in a fight?" And I said, well, that's only a small portion of it. It's like saying, why would you buy a gun? Do you plan on killing somebody? No, I hope not. James Bondero again points out Das Boot. And by the way, it's not Das Boot. It's spelled B-O-O-T. But if you ask a German speaker, they'll say it double O's. You pronounce O like Das Boot. And Das Boot is an amazing film shot in Germany about the submarine U-boat war. And it was done very, very realistically. On board, they built a set that was pretty much very, very correct to scale. Many of the things that happen in that movie are accurate. They strung together, of course, a bunch of events that could have been real. It was based on a book, which I'd actually read years earlier. And when I heard they'd made a movie, I'm like, okay. The original version was in German, subtitled. Later on, they went back and overdubbed it, and they overdubbed it so well that you cannot tell. And it's the only movie I know of that was shot in another language and overdubbed into English that well. I'm sure somebody can point out another example, but that's the one, and it's a very, very good movie. Somebody points out The Battle of Britain, Duncan Campbell. And are we talking about the movie that has Michael Caine in it? It was in the 60s or 70s. I saw that not too long ago, and it was on the cable. Saw it. It's a pretty good movie for the time. Ronald Kramer, Kid Rock or Eminem? I was always a Kid Rock fan. Eminem, I was never that much into the hip hop scene, but I liked Kid Rock, in particular his earlier stuff. I've got a couple of his CDs, and I can tell you that if you're bored and you want to see a mesmerizing live performance, type in Kid Rock Woodstock. And Kid Rock came out at Woodstock, one of the reiterations of Woodstock. I forgot what year it was. He'd only been out for a year or two with a major label. And he came out and he did a rendition of Bow at the Ba that was unbelievable. And it's broad daylight because he wasn't that big of a star, so he had an earlier time slot. And the amount of energy he puts into one song on stage is enough to probably, power the universe for 12 minutes. I mean, it's crazy. And it's he's got the crowd going insane, and especially if you like the song, it's an amazing performance, but it was pretty cool. So check that out. Kid Rock at Woodstock. When are you going to cover the slaw recipe? Alex, if you missed me earlier in the episode, I said specifically, if you've got a good recipe for coleslaw that's a little different, something spicy about it, something different about it, please email it to me, steve@lehtoslaw.com, and I will perhaps one of these make some coleslaw. Why not? I'll do a cooking episode of Lehto's Law. Eminem did a song featuring Kid Rock. I did not know that. There's only one real Woodstock, August 15th to 18th, 1969. Wizard 378 says that. And, I would tend to agree with you, but you have to admit that Woodstock was actually several different things. It was a big event, okay? And the event was what it was. But as far as a concert goes, it had high points, it had low points. People forget that, for instance, Sha Na Na played at Woodstock, okay? And Sha Na Na is an oldies group, right? Well, they weren't an oldies group in 1969. So when Sha Na Na came out on Woodstock, and they were doing songs from the 60s, and it was the 60s, it makes no sense at all. Like, they're basically a bad cover band with a guy, named Bowser. That's it, okay? So if you were at Woodstock, like if I said, hey, I can snap my fingers and put you back at Woodstock, I'll put you backstage at Woodstock, okay? You'll have a great seat. And you wind up sitting there with Sha Na Na or Joan Baez, you're going, wait a second. I want to see Jimi Hendrix do the Star Spangled Banner. I want to see the band. I want to see a big name. And Sha Na Na's out there. You're going to be going, oh, I guess it's not all it's cracked up to be. So there you go. Valkyrie is a decent movie. Jacob West. Yeah, Valkyrie's not bad. We've gone off on this war movie topic, but Valkyrie, of course, is all about the attempted overthrow of Hitler during the war by a large group of German anti-Nazis, I guess you'd call them, and a very good movie as well. A hard time taking Tom Cruise seriously in a role like that, but what can I tell you? David Brown, your overdubbing's not good right now, or maybe it's just my audio lagging. It's both. And I said to her, no, it's like a Godzilla movie, okay? I should probably take one of these and overdub the entire thing later and then repost it and see how close we can get it. Jimi Hendrix insisted on them playing who? Sha Na Na? I'd be surprised. Was Jimi Hendrix really a Sha Na Na fan? Woodstock versus Live Aid. Tommy, that's a good question. And I know you guys love it when I throw out really, really obscure stuff, but I actually know quite a bit about this. And the reason I know this is Live Aid was the concert put on by Bob Geldof mid-year of Ultravox. Bob Geldof at that time was best known as being the lead singer of the Boomtown Rats. And they put on shows, one in Washington, D.C. and one in England, simultaneously, more or less. And the shows were being done as a charity to raise money for a famine in Africa. And they got all these bands, the biggest names in music, to volunteer to play for free in exchange for trying to raise money for this good cause. Bob Geldof, whose idea it was, actually went around and asked different people to be involved, okay? And I know this because he wrote a book. Bob Geldof wrote a book called Is That It? And it's the story of his life and Live Aid. So we know from his book that, among other things, they approached Huey Lewis and the News and said, do you guys want to play? And Huey Lewis's manager said, how much are you going to pay us? And Bob Geldof mid-year said, we don't pay. This is a charity event. And the guy goes, dude, Huey Lewis does not play for free. Sorry. So Huey Lewis is one of the bands that refused to play. I'm sorry. Chris points out it was Philadelphia. I'm sorry. It's not Washington, D.C. It's Philadelphia. Philadelphia and London. I'm sorry. It's very hard because I'm reading comments, trying to arrange my thoughts. I was actually looking because the book Is That It is right there. And I was toying with the idea of going and getting it to hold it up as a prop, but I didn't. So Huey Lewis's people actually said, Huey doesn't play for free. Sorry. And refused to play. So just to put that in perspective, the surviving members of Led Zeppelin reunited to play Woodstock, to play Live Aid. The band Status Quo, huge in England, not so big here, huge in England. They'd been broken up. They reunited to play Live Aid. Huey Lewis and the News were too big to be on the stage with those people. Okay, so there you go. But Live Aid was an amazing, amazing event. I've seen clips of it since then. I think you can get high resolution, high quality footage of it as well. And there's a bunch of interesting things. Phil Collins played a set in England, flew to America on the Concorde, played a set over here. A whole bunch of crazy stuff happened. Bob Geldof himself performed as well. And one of the cool things about it was Bob Geldof met with all of the different performers and got word out and said, you guys are coming out. You're going to play 2 or 3 songs. That's it. 2 or 3 songs. And you are not playing your new garbage. You're going to play your hits. So if you're a band that has 10 albums out and you had a couple hits back here, you are not coming out and doing your new stuff. No one wants to hear that. Let's not even pretend. Don't play the new stuff. All I want is you come out and play your 1 or 2 or 3 hits. That's it. That's it. And they got pushback on that. And he said, I don't care. That's what we're doing. We're trying to raise money. We're not here to promote your latest bad album. Okay. And turns out everyone did it. Everyone did it. So it was a pretty cool idea. And the fact that 2 guys, and like I said, I knew who Bob Geldof was. I knew who Midge was, but not a lot of people, especially in America, had any idea who these guys were. And the fact they pulled that off and they got like the venues for free and donated, they got the acts for free. They got, I'm pretty sure most of the broadcasting stuff was donated or so on. MTV broadcast it in America. I believe it was the BBC broadcasting it in England and elsewhere. And then there were also satellite versions of it in other countries. So there was actually like a Live Aid performance in Moscow. There's a Live Aid performance, I think, in like Munich, that kind of thing. So it was an amazing event. One of the rare occasions we had something that was that big worldwide, coming together and succeeding. And again, just so you remember, the takeaway here is Huey Lewis was too big to be involved. Huey Lewis doesn't need a new drug. He needs to get off whatever he was on at that moment in time. So there you go. Pictures of Matchstick Men. That's the only song in America that we would know of Status Quo. So there you go. 10 years after, at Woodstock, Elvin Lee, best guitar solo ever. Yeah, Elvin Lee, and 10 years after, one of the bands that played at Woodstock. And there were some of the moments in Woodstock were stellar, including the Star Spangled Banner by Jimi Hendrix, I think, which was like early Monday morning by the time he got on. Woodstock was not terribly well arranged when it came to the logistics. And so as a result, they were going later and later and later, and some people didn't get on till really, really late. So, and by the way, in case you're curious, the title to Bob Geldof's book, Is That It? Is a reference to when they tore down the sets in England and tore down the sets in DC or Philadelphia. As they were tearing down the sets, I think it was Graham, the concert promoter, was there, and he walked out and he looked around, and the stadium was empty except for one kid who'd either fallen asleep or had been on drugs or something. And he kind of stood up and he looked around and he looked at the promoter. And he goes, "Is that it?" Like, and they weren't really sure what he was asking. Like, why was he asking that? So, Tom, you love the history. Thanks. Huey Lewis, too big to get involved. That's news. Exactly. Oh, God. Floyd Cordery, how about We Are the World? That was the sad part, because unfortunately charities became a thing right around then. And so then people started putting out all these charity records, and some of them were decent. And some of them, like Do They Know It's Christmas, are just kind of like, you listen to them now, they're very, very dated. And I don't know. I mean, if they raised money, great. I've got no problem with that. But some of these things you can tell were more like people like, I want to do something cool too, and whatever. So, California Jam was pretty good. I recall 72 or 73, saw it in junior high. There's also the US festivals, which I believe Steve Wozniak was involved in the 80s. I forgot the exact year. By the way, for my fans and my viewers on the West Coast, just so you know, I'll come clean. I am a huge Oingo Boingo fan. I love Oingo Boingo. The band, of course, broke up. Danny Elfman now is scoring movies. He said they can't ever tour again because he's got hearing damage and his doctors won't let him play live. But I went to law school in California and learned about Oingo Boingo. And if you don't know, they're a wonderful band. They're huge in California and on the West Coast. East of the Rockies, most people don't know them except for their song Weird Science, which is not really representative of what they do, but it was in the movie. But I love Oingo Boingo. So Tattoo You, referring to the Rolling Stones. Yeah, I've never seen the Rolling Stones live. I know people who have and have said that they were wonderful, very, very good. So, maybe next time they come around, I'll go see them if the tickets aren't $900 a piece. Monterey Pop Festival and the death of the hippies. Yeah, Monterey Pop was a big festival out in California. There were several festivals right around that time. The same idea where a whole bunch of bands played over a period of a couple of days. And it's a complicated story. I don't pretend to be an expert on it. But Monterey Pop is the one where the Hells Angels were brought in to be security, which nobody thought was a good idea at the time. But anyways, and something happened. And at one point in time, one of the band members of one of the bands playing got in an altercation with one of the Hells Angels. And I believe somebody got stabbed at one point. And it was many people saw that moment as a defining moment in the history of the whole free love hippie kind of thing. And it was the ugly side of that. So yeah, Monterey is famous for that as well. Iron Maiden, another one of the bands with people mentioning there. Bob Bong, I've seen the Grateful Dead live 10 times. I'm sorry, Allocated Brain, that was Altamont. I'm sorry, Altamont. Monterey Pop Festival was a big one, but Altamont was the one with the Hells Angels. I apologize. Again, this is my universal symbol for I got something screwed up, but I was close. There you go. Altamont was that. Yeah. Monterey Pop, I believe, and I'm going to guess, but wasn't Monterey Pop where Jimi Hendrix lit his guitar on fire? famous image. Jimi Hendrix comes out and does a set. And I'm doing it wrong because he does a set this way because he's left-handed. Jimi Hendrix comes out and does a set. And then at some point, he puts the guitar on the stage. Just happens to have a thing of lighter fluid. Douses the guitar with the lighter fluid. Lights it on fire. And he's kneeling behind it. Kind of like, we don't know if he's worshiping it, praying to it, or just summoning spirits from it. But there's a famous image. I think that was Monterey. But I know that my brother had that poster on the wall of our bedroom for years of Hendrix lighting his guitar on fire on stage. And, Hendrix did all kinds of things with the guitar that nobody thought possible or that nobody thought to do yet. So there you go. Okay. Meredith Hunter was the guy who was stabbed. I did not know that. And we did break 300 there briefly, but I don't think we're going to hit 500 today again. So someone once said Altamont was the death knell of the hippie movement, Chris Nemec. And that's a good way of saying it. Woodstock, many people would consider to be like the high point of it. And then that. So We Are the World was before Live Aid by a month. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. A lot of that stuff happened right around the same time. And I'm trying to remember because Do They Know It's Christmas was the one I think that a lot of people were kind of critical of, but so what was my favorite radio gig? Jeopardy 4100. And Dale's checking it from Mishawaka. I love Mishawaka. I used to get my haircut there all the time. I did several jobs in radio that were fun. My favorite was probably being a disc jockey at a contemporary station, a top 40 type station in Flint, CK105, which I have a coffee mug for around here somewhere, but it's out of reach, I think. But we got to play hit music, very, very up-tempo. Some of it was rock and roll. Some of it was top 40. We didn't play rap, but it was a lot of fun, high energy. And they were very, very good about just don't screw anything up, but you can do anything you want, as long as the music doesn't stop. And so it was a lot of fun to do. One of my favorite things. So have I heard Disturbed's cover of Sound of Silence, Haunting? Yes, I have. Yeah, one of the things about cover songs, when a band covers another band, is you either have to do it in a really, really good way, like update it maybe, or in an interpretation that's so different where you go, wow, that song is really, really versatile. And I'll give you an example. The band When in Rome, the song The Promise. Great, great song, new wave song. Here's Sturgill Simpson's version, and Sturgill Simpson's a modern country guy. And hear his version of it, and you go, these two versions are like not even on the same spectrum, not so far apart. And they're both so good that you go, wow, that's cool. Or Always on My Mind by Willie Nelson or the Pet Shop Boys. Who'd have thought that was possible? But it works. So I like a good cover if it's done well. Wasn't WABX a pirate station at one time? No, WABX was simply an FM station in Detroit. It was one of the first stations in America to start playing album rock on the FM. They weren't the first. There's a big debate about who was first. But WABX was 99.5 FM in Detroit. And they went on the air, very, very counterculture. They do like kite fly-ins at Belle Isle, and they'd have broadcasts from Ann Arbor during the Hash Bash, things like that. And they played, deep album cuts and stuff. Later on, they became more commercial, like everybody else did on the FM. But they were one of the first FM album rock stations, and they had a reputation as being very, very counterculture at the time. I worked at WABX in their later years as an intern, and I know a bunch of people worked there as well, but was never actually on the air there as WABX. In later years, I know that they became Young Country. Right before that, they were Wow FM, and Wow FM was a I'm looking for the mug. I can't reach it. I've got a mug over there for it. Wow FM was an FM talk station. I actually worked at 99.5 when it was Wow FM, the same signal as WABX, but was no more. Somebody asked, do you like Three Dog Night? And, these are cool questions because I always wonder how does somebody know to ask that question? But Three Dog Night, of course, the band that had a bunch of hits, Liar, One, Out in the Country, my favorite song by Three Dog Night. And the cool thing about Three Dog Night was it was a band that had three singers. And that's why they had the title Three Dog Night. They were looking for a title or a name of a band that would have the number 3 in it. So Three Dog Night was the name of the band. And there was a guy named Chuck Negron, who was one of the three singers in Three Dog Night. He wrote a book called Three Dog Nightmare, and it's his autobiography. It's a fascinating book. And he tells these stories about how he was so addicted to cocaine that he almost became non-functional, but the band was touring and they needed him to be able to stand upright and sing to be on tour. And so the band tolerated him for a little while. And he was talking about how he'd be, ready to go out on stage, and somebody bring him. They actually at one point in time were like trying to like ration the cocaine he was on, so he wouldn't do too much. And he wound up getting kicked out of the band. So he's kicked out of the band. He's broke. At one point in time, he's standing in line at a pawn shop about to sell all of his gold records from Three Dog Night, and he's selling for a penny on the dollar to go score some money for some more drugs. And he's run out of options. He's burned all his bridges. He has no more friends hardly, and he's living with a woman who's putting up with him and tolerating him just barely. And she's at the end of her tether. She's getting sick of this guy. Every day he leaves the house and does what he can to scrounge the money to get some drugs. So he goes to a drug house where he's got just enough money for like one hit of something. And he does it, and it's bad stuff. And it winds up knocking him out. And he's passed out on the floor. And there's all these other druggies around who are going, oh, wait, we can't let this guy die here because we might get in trouble. So somebody tries doing CPR on him, but they don't know how to do it. Plus, they're high on drugs, and they're pounding on his chest, and he sits up and manages to sit up just as the guy hits and pounds him right in the face and breaks his nose to where he gets 2 black eyes, and he's all screwed up from the bad drugs and getting hit in the face. So he gets up and he stumbles home. Just as he stumbles in the door, the woman he's living with turns and looks at him and goes, oh my God, what happened to you? And he goes, I owe some guys money, and they said they're going to kill me if I don't pay them. and they beat me up to prove they're telling the truth. Do you have a couple $100 I can go pay him? And she gave him the money, went out and he bought more drugs. So, true story, Chuck Negron, Three Dog Nightmare. I highly recommend the book if you want to see the seedier side of what it was like to be in one of the most popular bands in America. Three Dog Night was huge, absolutely huge. So it's a great story. And I played a lot of their music at different radio stations I worked at. So there you go. Somebody says, you're rambling. Oh, I've been rambling now for 1 hour, 14 minutes and 57 seconds. But thank you for checking in on that. Another of my favorite bands was Blues Image. Ride Captain Ride, one hit wonder. Pretty sure that's it. Lawrence Taylor, Let Him Ramble. It's his channel and live stream. There we go. Wasn't Huey Lewis on We Are the World? Probably. Everybody. I'm sure I probably was. I think everybody was. Porgy Tire Biter says cocaine is a heck of a drug. And, you know, I wouldn't know, but that's what I've heard. So, Behind the Vinyl is a great YouTube channel. Didn't realize Randy Bachman was in so many great bands. Randy Bachman, of course, from the Guess Who, and also Bachman Turner Overdrive. Some great music. Let It Roll, Taking Care of Business, of course. And of course, if you've seen the movie High Fidelity with John Cusack, it's a great book, by the way, by Nick Hornby. But Jack Black is in one of his earlier roles in that movie. And they ask him what the name of his band is. And at one point he goes, it's Kathleen Turner Overdrive, which is one of the greatest fake band names of all time. So Kathleen Turner Overdrive. Brager, bad experiences doing radio. I've been fired a bunch of times. That's the problem with radio. There's no job security. I had fun on the radio. The only bad experiences I had on the radio were working in formats I didn't enjoy. I worked in country for a while. I worked at some stations that had formats where they, played music I didn't care for. And, there's nothing worse than being a young guy who thinks he's really into rock and roll music, having to play Conway Twitty, and then go from that into the Oak Ridge Boys. I mean, that's like I died and gone someplace bad. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're into country music, I understand. I'm not insulting the music. It's just not what I was into. But, I got fired from that job. And then I quit a couple other jobs where I was so unhappy that I was going to quit if they didn't fire me. And then I also had stations change formats. And that's another problem with radio, is radio stations change formats the way you or I change our underwear, I hope. And so I've actually had it happen before where I was driving home from someplace, preparing to go into a radio station to do my shift, and I turn the radio on, and it's a different format. It's a digital radio. I know I'm on the right frequency, and they change formats. And so I go to the building and try to get in, and my key card has been changed. Like, I can't get in the building. So now I'm like, wait, is there going to be dead air when I should have been there? And no, they changed formats, and they didn't let us know, but they fired us all. So on Monday, because I was doing weekends there, on Monday, I called the program director. He said, dude, I'm really sorry, but they changed formats, and we brought in all new people. And, we got your last paycheck for you, but hey, what can I tell you? So that's the problem. Most people will tell you that radio is fun. It's something you can't describe because you get to engage with people in a different way than most jobs. And if you enjoy the music and the setting, it can be a lot of fun. But the pay is not that good, and the job security doesn't exist. There's no such thing as job security in radio. I've known guys who had contracts who actually said, I signed a contract. I'm working here for a year. 6 months in, they change formats and they fire them. They pay off the contract. So, or they make them write out the contract, or they can't work until the end of the contract. So, radio is a cruel, cruel mistress. So there you go. Do you miss the days of regional radio? Now stations are all owned by a couple big corporations. Derek Hellman. And that is a problem nowadays. Radio stations, generally speaking, are owned by big conglomerates. and most stations are formatted and programmed from miles away, and they often have syndicated or piped in shows. Nothing's local. And so if I want to find out what's going on now, I don't check the radio. I check the internet, you know. So to compete, they really ought to go hyper local and get good local programming. But for the most part, they don't do that. So there you go. It sounds a lot like how George Gilmart got fired from radio station KDGE in 1996. Don't know the story, but every disc jockey I've ever met. And by the way, the robotic woman's voice on my videos, she's not a robot. She's actually a radio personality who does voiceover work. And so when I talk to her to prove to you that she's not a robot, I'm going to ask her some of these questions, because every radio station person I've ever met, disc jockey I've ever met, we sit down, we tell stories, and we have all had similar experiences. Not identical, but you know, the stories about working in small markets and the crazy things that can happen in small markets. The station's run by crazy people who bought a radio station, didn't know how to run it. Or the crazy stories about format changes, you know, or the crazy stories about getting fired for no reason, you know. Or the crazy stories about disc jockeys on the air who freaked out and did something crazy. I mean, you know, I know a guy who swears this is true, that he was working at a radio station. He didn't do it, but the guy he knows did. And the guy was on the air one night, and he got so angry about something that he put on an album, a 33, an LP, and he dropped the needle at the beginning of one side, and he called up the station owner and goes, "I just quit, and I'm leaving the building right now," and hung the phone up and drove off into the night and listened to that track as it you know, went down one side, and one side of albums, maybe 15, 20 minutes, maybe a half hour if you're lucky. And he said, sure enough, about halfway through, a jingle played and the station owner's voice came on the radio. The guy came in and had to play DJ until he could figure out what to do, because he just lost his talent and couldn't reach anybody else at night, because this is the day of old, you know, phones that hung on the wall. They weren't in your pockets. There you go. USA Forever. Steve, I think we need to bottle your DNA for future common sense. Yes, knowledge is power, but getting across to others to listen. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I recently did a video that'll go up tomorrow where I talk about how we need to understand one another. I actually went off not just on a rant, but a little bit of a almost spiritual point. We'll see. People will either love it or hate it. We'll see. I know a crazy man that owns 2 radio stations. He's owned one of them for more than 50 years, Copper Hamster. Where might that be? I'd be curious. Radio stations are interesting. In the old days, they were licensed to print money. But nowadays, it's much more difficult. What's really sad, if you turn on a lot of radio stations in small markets, even in big markets, AM stations will often sell off their time slots on Saturday and Sunday, and you'll hear local attorneys, chiropractors, dentists, realtors, and they have a 1-hour show where they come on and talk about themselves, and it's basically an infomercial. And I know of attorneys who pay good money to have a radio show at a station in a market, and they brag about, I'm on the radio. And they don't, I guess, think that anybody's going to go, well, isn't that just a paid commercial where you pay to be on the radio? Isn't that, I mean, couldn't anybody do that? And the answer is yes, anybody can do that. So when you brag about something that anybody can do, I don't know, it just kind of loses its cachet. Larry King used to tell a story about putting on a long song to have a late night rendezvous with a woman. While with the woman, the record got stuck. You know, Larry was a dastardly fellow. I wouldn't put that past him. A lot of disc jockeys will tell you stories about putting on long songs to take care of business, but it's usually to run to the men's room or the ladies' room. And I can tell you right now that when I was in Bad Axe, Michigan, the radio station was a house, and the studio was at one end, and the men's room was at the other end, and we were playing records. So I had to, if I wanted to go to the men's room, put on a record, get the next record ready to go, and then hit start on this record, and remember how long it was, run to the other end of the building, do my business, and run back before I had to start this record. And I can't recall the exact times it happened to me, but I know it happened to me and other guys. You get to the other end of the building and you hear the record skip. And a record skipping is horrible because and it just repeats a line over and it's like a Milli Vanilli concert. Okay, the record starts skipping and it sounds horrible, but you can't make it stop without running in there and physically turning the music down and just hitting the next song. And that's one of the problems with records. A worse problem is they started doing for Craig C. I work for Honey Radio. Yes, we'll talk about that in a second. I had carts. We had carts and songs that would be on carts. And a cart looks like an 8-track and it's got a continuous loop piece of tape in there. And you put the cart in and hit start, and then the song would play. And then you put the next cart in and so on. Carts would jam sometimes. And I remember a radio station in Saginaw, Michigan that called themselves the New 102. And they'd say we were in laser digital stereo. And they were playing CDs, which was a big deal at the time. And I remember the woman, disc jockey, announcing a song going, and now in laser digital stereo. And she names the song and she hits start and the cart jammed. And it made a sound that CDs don't make. It made a sound only carts make when they jam. So the laser digital stereo was a lie. They were playing some CDs, but still playing some carts. So there you go. Somebody asked about Honey Radio. And WHND was the radio station. It had an FM counterpart, WHNE, I believe. I could be wrong on the last call letter. Honey Radio at one point in time was an oldies station in Detroit that had on the FM a signal and on the AM a signal. And the AM signal was a daytime only station, 560 AM. Somewhere along the line, they separated the signals and they changed the format of the FM to adult contemporary. But they kept the AM station playing oldies for years, Honey Radio. And 560 was a very good signal during the day, but they signed off at night. So in the wintertime, at 5 o'clock in the evening, actually, WHND now ends its broadcast day. And boom, silence until the next morning, they signed back on again. But they played a lot of really cool old music, including a lot of stuff from the 50s and early 60s, which a lot of the other oldies stations wouldn't play because it was too old. So I always liked WHNE for that purpose, Honey Radio for that purpose. So that's pretty cool. Somebody else mentioned Brockmire. And of course, Brockmire is a TV show. It's on cable. And it's Hank Azaria playing a pseudo washed up sports play-by-play guy. It is one of the funniest things on television. I forgot what channel it's, Showtime, HBO, I don't know. It's one of those channels, but it's hilarious. And Hank Azaria is brilliant. Of course, he's half the voices on The Simpsons, but it's a very, very clever show, very, very funny. And so I would highly recommend, if you get a chance to watch Brockmire, to check it out. So didn't they limit how long a song you could play, Fred Hill? Well, it depends on the format. Most radio stations I worked at just had music in the studio and they go, here's the songs you can play. So, they wouldn't put a long song in the studio. So you had to just know which long songs you had. Most guys who worked in FM radio, if they're playing album rock, know that Stairway to Heaven is a long song they play. You would know what the long songs were. And you would, you'd time it. You go, oh, next hour I'm playing this song. That's when I have to run to the other end of the building and take care of business. So there you go. Did you ever get a song request by fax? Yes, I did. That's a good question. When I worked at CK105 in Flint, we used to give out our request lines. So I can tell you right now that the request lines were 2515105 in Flint or 695 WWCK in Saginaw. And the reason I know that is I said them so many times we got them memorized. Okay, 2515105 or 695 WWCK. We used to also give out the fax number and say, you want a fax request? Because it was such a highfalutin, high-tech thing to have a fax number. We gave the fax number out over there and said, you can fax this request as well. But I'll tell you right now that the fax machine was the other end of the building where the secretaries and the salespeople sat. No one ever checked it. So once in a while you walk over and go, somebody faxed me 3 hours ago and asked to hear a song, But there's also that old thermal paper that just came off in rolls. So what are you going to do? Cousin Brucey and Wolfman Jack. Yeah, old school guys. Cousin Brucey is still on the air on Sirius XM. I believe Wolfman Jack passed away a few years ago. Wolfman Jack was a classic. He had a radio show at one point out of Mexico on a Clear Channel station with like 1 trillion watts. You could hear it pretty much on the entire planet. But he had a great delivery, that great voice. And I know that he had a low spot in his career. And when American Graffiti came out, the filmmakers actually talked him into doing some voiceovers in the thing and also to appear on camera. But the cool part was that they not only paid him to appear on camera, but they gave him a slice of the soundtrack. And they actually did that as a favor to him because they knew that he needed the money. And I read an interview with him in later years where he actually said that if that hadn't happened, if they hadn't done that for him, his life would have turned out radically different because he was so messed up financially that was like a godsend, because the soundtrack to American Graffiti sold so well for a period of 10 or 15 years that it actually allowed Wolfman Jack to survive a very, very dry patch in his career. He also appeared on television a bunch of times. I remember an episode of The Odd Couple with Wolfman Jack. So it's pretty funny. So Marshall Smith, imagine if those White Castle fighting judges were to team up with some of the Popeyes chicken fighting employees. You'd have an Armageddon. There you go. Phone companies hated the call-in contests. I'm not so sure about that. I know that most radio stations I worked at had dedicated lines that were on different exchanges. So in Flint, all of the radio stations had their phone number starting with 251. And that was a separate exchange designed to handle more traffic. So when I worked at WTRX in Flint, it was 251-5000. CQ105 was 251-5105. And the other stations were all 251 something. And it would either be their call letters or their frequency number or something. And the 251 was the exchange. I know that in Detroit, it was 298. So I'm trying to remember now, but like WABX may have been like, 298 WABX, or maybe 298 0995, something like that. And so that was fairly common that you'd have a separate phone bank that was assigned to you by the phone company specifically for high volume calls. But what are you going to do? So Wolfman Jack also appeared as himself on Battlestar Galactica. If that's true, it's fabulous, but I wouldn't know. And of course, VW and Tiny gets the last comment of the day. Next up, Manfred Mann. Manfred Mann, of course, is the guy who did Doo-Wah Diddy. But of course, Manfred Mann had a later album with some hits on it, including an obscure song called Stranded in Iowa, which I highly recommend. So there you go. But we've been talking for over an hour and a half. We did break 300 today. We didn't break 500. So what you need to do is round up all of your friends, neighbors, and countrymen and tell them, please, guys, on Sundays at 1 o'clock, you got to log on and listen to this crazy attorney, former disc jockey who rambles about stuff that people throw at him in the comment section below. And oh, by the way, one last announcement. I have shot a video series. It's 4 videos entitled Welcome to Crazy Town. And I'm going to premiere episode 1 this week. I'm not sure which day it's going to be, but I'm going to premiere it with the premiere thing that they do on YouTube. So it'll send out notices going, there's going to be a premiere. And during the premiere, there'll be a dialogue box like this, where we can talk, you and I, in the dialogue box while the video is playing. I think it's how it works. I've never done it before. So it'll be a new experience for me and you. But it's a video series. I don't know what else to call it. It's 4 pieces long, episode 1, 2, 3, 4, called Welcome to Crazy Town. And it's recounting a true story of something I just went through. I've talked about this a little tiny bit. I've hinted at it, but I just had something happen in my life where it started in September and it ended last week. So it's a 4-part series. Welcome to Crazy Town. There will be a premiere on YouTube, and then the video will go up on my channel afterwards, after the premiere. So again, thank you for hanging out with me. I'm going to end it now. We'll do it again next Sunday at 1 o'clock. Until then, behave yourselves. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.